Got it.
That, and then a lot of work pieces. And I'll bring that forward.
No?
We are not going to ask for report outs because there's a staff member at each of your tables that was kind of collecting and getting this information. So we'll make sure you get feedback on this because, again, we want to move into our presentation from the Civic Canopy on early childhood, well, the Early Childhood Partnership Civic Canopy on the collective impact. So they are, I don't know who's here.
Yeah, they were zooming in.
Oh,
We're doing some crazy.
well, hello there.
So do you need the microphone for?
You're good. You got this. I don't know. She was doing stuff on the screen, and we're sharing screen, so I'm not sure why she's not talking. There's a chat in there, Angela. Okay.
It's just that one on over. If you unplug it, do you hear it come down on the Yeah. Yeah. She's not like that. Oh.
Maybe while they're figuring that out, I do have some handouts that we just talked about. I will send around the Join the Celebration on the Friday library event. So for any programs, if you can get that message out to families or any programs that want to participate, please feel free to make copies. And then Angela also talked about the pinwheel, the Child Abuse Prevention Month, and she's got some great talking points here. This lady did a super job of promoting this out. And please, 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 we've got pinwheels for you to take with you today. We can check those out, and we've got talking points you can set up. And it's all about protective factors and strengthening families and just going about it in a positive way. And we just love for you to put up some pinwheels and promote that at your organization. Let's see. Just out of curiosity, does anyone have your pinwheels up at your program? We had several people stop by yesterday and pick them up. That was exciting. We have enough signage to see if we across the street we have a sign posted. Looks like we're making progress, Angela. Maybe not. We did practice yesterday, everybody, and of course yesterday everything went smooth. Yes. Of course. Of course.
I can give a quick update on a couple of bills. Great. I had a conversation last week with Bill Jager at Carl Children's Campaign about a couple of legislative bills. There is, right now currently in the long bill, there's about $15,000 in CCAP money for the next fiscal year. About 12.7 million is just to fund additional money into the allocation pot. 2 million is sort of, it's not really a slush fund, but it's a fund of money to help counties who have folks that transfer from over county line and they switch their authorization and then they don't have the same reimbursement rates, and so counties have to do catch up. So there's some money for some of that catch up. There was a bill that went in and did some, that was sponsored by JBC, that went in and made some changes around, there were some changes to some of the legislation out of House Bill 1317, not big changes, but a few things. But there was some concern from counties, and so that bill has been pulled back and it's probably going to have some amendments, but it probably will change a little bit about how funding will come out for CCAP. The thing that got counties in an uproar was they were going to put some things in legislation about the allocation process, and there isn't any county out there that's going to let anybody mess, especially not El Paso, mess with their allocation. So that was where that happened. There is, the federal dollars. So the federal dollars, the 5.7 billion that was signed into law a couple of weeks ago, there's been no distribution plan yet, but Children's Campaign has a call this week with CLASP. And in the initial information that came from CLASP, 35 million of that would have come to Colorado from the CCD, the Child Care Development Fund, and would have gone to CCAP. But that was before this. Nobody really knows if the feds are going to carve off some of that money at the top to keep at their department, and then what will happen when it gets out to the states, what will be the timeline on moving that money to the states, nor what will happen with the quality carve-off that has to come out of that. So there isn't any real timeline yet. I think once this meeting takes place, this phone call meeting this week, there might be some additional information coming from Colorado Children's Campaign. But Jackie will be able to let you know what's going on with that, because she's in the loop on that stuff through It's About Kids communities. So we should know. I think everyone would be pretty surprised if we had it by July 1, but you never know. But there is quite a bit of money that should be coming to states for subsidy. Oh, cool. Sorry.
Thank you.
that scenario, all able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. And I'm sorry, it's weird not to be able to see all of you in the room, but I'm sure you all are all looking lovely today, and thank you for being patient with all the technology. So I'm Hannah Nichols, and chime in at any point if you guys can't hear very well. And I kept the webcam off so you guys can't see me, just because it makes it much easier to see all of the slides. So hopefully the slides you're seeing it's not the presenter version, it's hopefully just the slide on the screen. Is that right, Angela?
No, it's the presenter version.
It's the presenter version? Okay, I will take it out of the, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect, okay. Hopefully this is the last glitch from here. And I'm going to go ahead and press record so that we can share this afterward, and it'll be uploaded to YouTube, it sounds like. So thanks to everybody for having me today remotely. I know, again, it's kind of odd to have a presentation like this remotely. So my name's Hannah Nichols. I may know some of you, I may or may not. I'm with the Civic Canopy, and we're a community-based nonprofit located in Denver. To provide a little bit of background, so we work to transform the way pivotal, important issues are solved in our society by creating a culture of collaboration across Colorado. So we're a community-based nonprofit located in East Denver, and we're working, primarily our work is to equip organizations, individuals, collaborative groups with the tools they need to tackle those complex issues and work together effectively. So we do that through a community-based learning model that's research-based that you see on the right side there. We do that through building connections, through shared technology, building capacity through training and technical assistance, like these types of events and trainings, and building a movement through engagement and advocacy, so supporting partners who are working together to build movements and support change by bringing different diverse voices to the conversation. And so most of my work here at the Civic Canopy supports stewarding and network stewardship around the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership. Many of you are hopefully members if you aren't already. And that's a statewide network that we'll talk a little bit about later as kind of a case study of collective impact. But in terms of what we want to cover today, hopefully leave understanding why some of our biggest cultural and social issues cannot be tackled by one individual's agency or sector alone. Hopefully you feel like you gain clarity on the basic premise and history of collective impact as an approach to collaborative processes. And hopefully you feel like you have access to more tools and resources to learn more about collective impact after this and collaboration for social change. So, and I want to confirm, do I have until 4 p.m., including kind of discussion and questions?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I just wanted to confirm and make sure I don't go over time. So, we live in a very complex world, as you all know. The problems that we are taking on together really no longer lend themselves to simple solutions. And if they did, we really wouldn't all be here today scratching our heads about what to do with them. So we love this quote from Lawrence J. Peter that some problems are so complex that you need to be highly intelligent and well-informed just to be undecided about them. And in the divisive world we live in, that feels more and more true every day. And so when we think about problem types in the big picture way of thinking, we kind of look at it from simple, complicated to complex. So if you're thinking about something like a healthcare kind of issue as an example we like to use, a broken arm or a broken wrist is a simple problem. We know, the definition of the problem is clear, the bone is broken, it takes an x-ray to figure that out. The solution is clear that you need a cast. The kind of challenge it takes to get there is technical. You put a cast on the arm over time, it heals. You can get to more complicated problems that might be, replacing a heart and open heart surgery, which again, the definition of the problem is clear, or it might be implementing a new policy in a hospital system. The definition of that solution might be unclear. We have to figure out how we get there. There might be multiple approaches you take to get there. The kind of challenge might be technical, but also needs to change over time and be adaptive. But again, totally solvable without bringing large groups of people together. Complex problems are, thinking about tackling obesity in a society, or in a community, or in a neighborhood. Even the definition of the problem might be completely unclear to those involved. So there's work to do to get people on the right page. The definition of the solution, you might have a myriad of solutions to get there in tackling an issue like obesity and healthy eating in a community. And the kind of challenge is definitely adaptive. There are lots of ways to go about solving that problem. It takes continuous, adjustment, measurement of how you're doing, and kind of adherence to these shared outcomes in order to figure that out. So we'd like to use a matrix here that's a kind of a useful way of thinking about those problem types and how it connects to this idea of collective impact as an approach to solving these big, hairy social problems. So this problem type comes from Ralph Stacey, a famed organizational psychologist who is fascinated by the question of what made organizations effective. And he noticed through his research that really what made organizations successful had less to do with their strategic plans and how we typically responded to problems, whether it would be direct service or more systems level type organizations, and even more that their success really varied based on the types of problems that they were addressing. So the matrix that you see relates to really two key factors. So whether a group is close to, you see on the center of the axis here, or far from uncertainty as to what it would actually take to solve any given problem. So that's what you see kind of on the bottom side. And also how close or far they are to agreeing on what strategy or strategies it takes to solve that problem together. So in cases where agreement and certainty are high, we call this a simple problem. So you can plan, control, use best practices to tackle it and solve it with, again, not a great degree of needing to leverage large groups of partners, figuring out a shared agenda, determining what your outcomes are. Pretty simple to tackle. And so when we move to areas where we're more close to agreement on doing something about the problem, but just not how to solve it, this is more of a technically complicated solution. So my slides got a little funky here. Hold on. There we go. It skipped a little bit. So thinking of getting to the moon, for example, there's lots of agreements on the importance of that. If you think back to 1968 when we sent somebody to the moon, there was just really no clear way to actually accomplish that goal. So they found the most technically competent people they could find. They gave them lots of support, lots of funding, lots of high levels of accountability. So even though we knew what needed to happen, it was just the technical complications of how do we actually get there. And then you get to socially complicated problems, which really involve more political processes, creating common ground. So these are more socially complicated problems where there's agreement on the actual nature of the problem. So you might have low graduation rates would be an example, or low birth weights, or maternal child health problems, something like that. But differences as to how to actually tackle it and what to do about it. So if you're thinking about the issue of low graduation rates in a county, it might be, the debate of charters versus neighborhood schools versus putting funding here versus putting funding there. These are socially complicated problems, and one resolved ultimately through political means, negotiated agreements, and consensus building. In some ways, these are the types of problems that can lend themselves to a little more of kind of a collective impact approach. But again, if there's agreement on even the problem and where you're starting from, tends to be more just of the socially complicated type. And then we enter what we like to call the zone of complexity. So complex problems really lack both a clear definition and clear solution. So they fit outside of these kind of bubbles here, so to speak. And so they require adaptive approaches because the process and outcomes are much more complicated. There's no clear cause and effect that everybody can get on the same page about. They often include values and beliefs and need to evolve based on what works and doesn't work that are really inherently tied to emotions and that kind of thing. The answer might not be known, and even if it was, it couldn't be addressed by one individual or group alone, or even a sector alone. And this is a lot of the work in early childhood that we're thinking about, and I know that Alliance for Kids is thinking about how to work across sectors. It's not something that just the early learning or the healthcare or public health sector can tackle alone. These are big, complicated problems. Addressing obesity in a community, addressing early childhood poverty, understanding the differences between these complex, complicated systems is becoming important for many aspects of management and policy. And with complicated problems or issues, one can kind of define the problem and strategically develop actions, timeframes, milestones along that path to success that you're seeing. And when it comes to more complex adaptive systems, that cause and effect are really difficult to predict. And so this is where the Canopy really does our work in supporting groups who are in this area, trying to figure out whether they've already done some work to identify some sort of common agenda and do some definition of the problem, and are just trying to figure out where to go from there, or whether you're starting at totally square one in an organization or in a community that maybe is suddenly experiencing massive migration rates. As an example of places where we've worked in Prowers County. Issues like that, or a statewide issue around paid family leave, or just strong early childhood development, which is a lot of the work we all do. So this is kind of where the canopy sweet spot is in this zone of complexity, so to speak. So back in 2011, for those who are totally unfamiliar with collective impact, was a framework that really came about back in 2011. So for those we are lovers of the Stanford Social Innovation Review here. They have amazing stuff on all kinds of social impact and social change type work. So this article came out in 2011 by Tanya and Kramer, and it spread like wildfire. It really hit a nerve with a lot of folks who felt like they were doing this kind of work, and suddenly many people were just elated to finally have guardrails or a framework from which to work, and some were also like, well, we've been doing this work forever. You're just creating something out of something we've been doing for a long time. For those who might be working on toxic stress, I know we had the same reaction when the science around toxic stress came out. Around the same time, actually, the collective impact came out. This is work we've been doing for so long, and finally there is a language and taxonomy and more of guardrails, I guess, around which we can work together. So at the Civic Canopy, we were doing this work around collaborative efforts, and we got forwarded this email so many times of like, I think this is what you guys have been working on and what you've been talking about. And so I kind of started this big process of the Canopy taking on a lot more concrete role in this collective impact space. And so the kind of instruction manual, so to speak, as it was in terms of this first iteration of collective impact, part of today is really highlighting how it has evolved over time, and it really has, even since 2011, since it first kind of emerged. But at its foundation, that initial kind of article publication highlighted these 5 conditions of collective impact that can help organizations working in that zone of complexity, or collaboratives, whatever it might be, communities working in that zone of complexity, what were these foundational elements that were needed in order to be successful. So first was a common agenda that everybody has a shared vision for change, including a common understanding of the problem and approach to solving it. So in the early childhood world, many of us adhere to the Early Childhood Colorado Framework as a common agenda, at least in a broad sense of our kind of true north, our shared agenda. Shared measurements being how we collect data measuring results consistently across all participants, ensuring alignment and that we can hold each other accountable. And that looks different across different initiatives, and I'll highlight a case study of that a little bit later as it pertains to the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership. Mutually reinforcing activities, so activities that are differentiated while still being coordinated and supported through reinforcing plans of action. So this is the one that is it's pretty technically complicated and the hardest to achieve in my mind and in our mind, but it happens and it's beautiful when it does. Continuous ongoing communication, and that's not just ensuring that newsletters get sent out, but ensuring that there are feedback loops, open communication, and opportunities for the voices at the table to be heard, that everybody who plays a role in that issue can be heard and share their voice. And then backbone support, which is largely what the Canopy, the role we played for a long time, is creating and managing these efforts, supporting them to get off the ground with coordination, stewardship, supporting action teams, and I'll kind of highlight how that has played out as we go. So at its core kind of definition and background, collective impact is really a commitment of a group of important actors from diverse backgrounds, sectors, to a common agenda for solving a specific complex social problem at scale. And the term specific is one of those that's been very subjective and lends itself to discussion more than we can do today around how specific does that focus need to be to really achieve collective impact. I know that in our example that we'll highlight, the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership, the mission is really around building a stronger system of support for children and families, not directed at a specific issue or problem, and that creates both opportunities and challenges, whereas it might be different if somebody's tackling, again, like the example I threw out before was, in Prowers County, they were suddenly experiencing issues with massive migration rates in and out of their community. And so that was a kind of specific yet complex problem that they could tackle as a community. So these are problems that no single organization or Sector can create and create solutions for at large scales and do it alone. So we've seen collective impact projects across all types of issues all around the world, whether it be education, health, homelessness, poverty, community development, climate change, I could go on. So this is kind of a great example of and a useful way to visualize the difference between collective impact and how we kind of typically have approached in our kind of typical approach and how it differs from isolated impact. So frequently, you think of each organizer or each arrow here, I guess, as an organization if you think about it. Or a group contribution. Frequently, we all feel like we're, at the bottom here, possibly working against each other, or at the very least, moving in different directions, or maybe our goals are in different directions. With intention and commitment, groups can move and align their efforts towards shared goals. So kind of the middle one that we see, where there's more coordinated action, still on separate paths, perhaps, but again, moving in the similar direction. And as we think of, trying to click here, there we go. The arrows got a little funky on my formatting on my slide, so I apologize. So if they take the next big leap, often we hope to see an explicit shared agenda, more rigorous and strategic learning and accountability, that consistent continuous quality improvement, looking back at adjusting as we go. You'd hopefully see this more, everybody moving in step with a deeper impact. So this was back in, I believe it's 2014, was when we saw kind of collective impact 2.0, if you will. That initial framework provided this great foundation, and yet there were groups that felt like, it feels like this formula that theoretically you're supposed to plug in these great 5 conditions as I kind of go back here. We plug these things in and suddenly out pops collective impact and massive social change. Well, obviously, you know, these are just 5 key foundations. There are other things that go into play. So as we learned over time, FSG, which is a national organization that does a massive amount of research on collective impact and support of collective impact initiatives, kind of brought out this layer to add on top of the kind of foundations of collective impact, these mindset shifts that we have to think about in addition to those 5 kind of foundational elements that we, and I won't go too deep into this in the interest of moving on, but you can see that, you know, we have to move from technical solutions to problems to really being adaptive, and that's how it's evolved over time. I think people automatically, our brains work until we plug this in and it comes out the other side, but you have to actually consistently revisit, adapt, adjust. Relationships, the second one here, and trust are huge as it pertains to these things. You can't just bring everybody to the table and plug those things in and hope things turn out well. You have to build those trusts, the relationships, getting the right people at the table, ensuring that credit isn't hoarded. I love that. That's a funny term to me, but that we see credit as shared currency that can be shared across organizations and entities. Even so, it felt also like this just came out in 2016, the kind of 3.0 version of collective impact. And I will admit, as a backbone organization, in some ways it felt like, oh my gosh, we just mastered this first piece and now you're adding more layers on it. I know for many backbones in Colorado, there has been that kind of sense of, oh my gosh, we just are trying to manage getting those 5 foundational pieces and we keep adding layers. But the truth is, these layers do add so much value in making collective impact kind of work. So moving from this kind of management paradigm from these, at the very core, at the very basic of how we've typically worked in the past, these very specialized agendas, to a more common agenda, which is one of those foundational things. Moving to shared measurement and more aligned work. Independent activities where we're all just doing our own thing, to those mutually reinforcing activities we talked about. The sporadic communication to continuous, unsupported to having a backbone, supporting your role, and then adding this other layer of more of a movement building paradigm. And this whole concept of movement building and how you build movements out of collective impact has been huge. And Tamarack Institute is the group that kind of added this 3rd layer on and helped us really understand a little bit more of, especially as a backbone entity, how to move from being an organization that just helps support these things to get off the ground to really being a container for community change. And hopefully you'll see more about how that actually plays out when I go through a kind of case study in a moment here. But these other layers added so much for us, and I think the authentic community engagement one was another piece where we just felt like, okay, what if you get all these people to the table, and then if you don't have those with lived experience, for example, if you're talking about healthy eating, active living in a community, but you have funders and nonprofits at the table, and not anybody living in that community, then you're not going to achieve collective impact. So it's truly getting all of those voices at the table. So this is outlined in a resource that I can send in follow-up items in a more much more concrete way through a publication kind of format that can really help think about collective impact in a bigger way that we've applied very much in our community here at the Civic Canopy and in our work. So that was like the super quick overview of collective impact. I realized in a lot of cases we would end up doing like a half day. We have half day, full day kind of trainings on collective impact and how it works. This is just the kind of super high level highlight of how it works, but this just gives you kind of a quick rundown of what we went through very quickly, and hopefully we're going to walk through a case study in a moment here that hopefully makes it a little more real. But I do want to pause there and kind of, if there are any really pressing questions or things you want to revisit before we jump into the case study side of things and how it applies to an early childhood level. Is there any questions or comments? Great. So I'm wondering, and I would always do a show of hands, but maybe I can do it through the phone and have it translated, of how many in the room, or what percentage, to what degree are people in the room familiar with the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership? Do we have mostly new people?
Mostly new.
Mostly new, great. So the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership is a statewide network of individuals, organizations, agencies, actively implementing strategies to move the needle on outcomes within the Early Childhood Colorado Framework. Alliance for Kids is one of the most active members of the partnership at this time. And so really the purpose and mission of the group is to offer the space and conditions for diverse cross-sectors, so across early care and education, mental, physical, behavioral health, family support like child welfare, essentially anybody and everybody who sees themselves within the vision of the Early Childhood Colorado Framework that all Colorado children are valued, healthy, and thriving would be welcome in this network. To identify common results, share best practices, and implement strategies to improve our system of serving children and families and their well-being. And so we are statewide. We're inclusive, open, welcoming to all who want to participate, and a key core principle is that we believe no agency can do it all. That's a key premise as to why the partnership was created, is that it felt like in order to maximize our shared impact, it took that kind of collective impact approach, if you will. So the partnership adopted a collective impact approach kind of formally in 2013. This was shortly after the original Early Childhood Colorado Framework emerged, and also after the collective impact framework emerged. At that time, the network identified the Civic Canopy as the kind of backbone organization for the network. The network had received a federal grant to support engaging and